The depths of the Aegean Sea hold secrets that humanity discovered by accident. Over 2,000 years ago, a ship carrying mysterious treasures sank off the coast of Antikythera. Among the wreckage, they found not only bronze statues and ceramics, but also a strange mechanism that was thousands of years ahead of its time. What else did this ancient underwater tomb conceal? Could the Antikythera ship be the key to the lost knowledge of antiquity? Let's embark on a journey to uncover one of the most mystical mysteries in history. In ancient times, when ships crossed the Mediterranean Sea, they often encountered what sailors called Poseidon's wrath. Sudden storms, treacherous currents, and hidden rocks beneath the water. One such deadly spot was the strait between Crete and the Peloponnese, near a small, seemingly unremarkable island called Antikythera. It was here, more than 2,000 years ago, that an event took place that modern archaeology calls one of the most mysterious shipwrecks in history. It all began with a ship sailing from east to west. Its exact route remains unknown, but most researchers believe that it set sail from Rhodes or from the ports of Asia Minor. Its final destination was apparently Italy, possibly one of the ports of Campania. But the ship never reached its destination. A storm suddenly struck the vessel. The ancient Greeks and Romans knew how to build ships that could withstand strong waves, but the power of the elements that raged in this area proved fatal. Some hypotheses suggest that the ship struck underwater rocks or capsized due to improper cargo distribution. According to another version, the ship lost control due to overloading. Subsequent findings made it clear that it was carrying not just goods, but a whole collection of valuables. Everything was lost that night: the ship, its crew, and possibly its passengers. The exact numbers remain unknown. However, judging by the remains found and the scale of the cargo, there were at least several dozen people on board. They went down with everything they were carrying and were buried at the bottom of the sea, like heroes of a tragedy, frozen in time. Their grave remained untouched for almost 2,000 years. The island of Antikythera was far from the main trade routes, and for centuries this part of the sea was forgotten. It was only in 1900, by chance, that humanity came into contact with this history again. Greek sponge divers working off the coast of Antikythera descended to the depths and saw something that turned their understanding of the seabed upside down: a bronze statue lying in the sand. This discovery marked the beginning of a new era in archaeology. The first expedition, organized with the participation of the Greek government and specialists, brought dozens of objects to the surface, but the conditions were extremely difficult. A depth of about 50 meters, underwater currents, and limited technology. Nevertheless, among the algae, wood debris, and limestone deposits, traces of a lost civilization began to emerge. The ship was huge by ancient standards. It could have been up to 30 meters long and about 10 meters wide. It had 2 decks, a powerful stern, and, judging by the massiveness of the remains of the structure, was intended for long sea voyages. This was not just a transport vessel, it was a ship with a special mission. The most surprising thing was that the ship had not completely rotted away. Thanks to the conditions at the bottom of the sea, the absence of oxygen, limestone deposits, and a constant temperature, part of the wooden planking and fastenings had been preserved. allowing researchers to reconstruct the ship's appearance. It was clear at first glance that this was no ordinary merchant ship. Its holds concealed works of art, mysterious mechanisms, and exquisite ceramics. All this suggested that the ship was carrying a special cargo, perhaps intended for the Roman nobility, museums, temples, or even a secret repository of knowledge. What exactly happened that night? Why did the ship stray off course? Who was on board? These questions remain unanswered. But one thing is clear: the ship's demise was no accident. It was a tragedy that took with it unique artifacts, knowledge, and perhaps a piece of history we never knew existed. Thus begins the story of the Antikythera shipwreck, a story in which a chance discovery opens the door to a forgotten world of ancient engineering, art, and perhaps something more. When the first bronze fragments began to rise from the seabed near Antikythera, archaeologists hoped to find gold. And that was natural. After all, in the popular imagination, the seabed is associated with pirate treasures, chests of coins, and royal jewels. But what the divers and salvage divers brought to the surface turned out to be far more mysterious than just gold. These were evidence of the lost greatness of an ancient civilization. Among the first finds were fragments of bronze statues. Some were almost intact. Others were broken into pieces. Heads, arms, legs, torsos. Scientists were particularly struck by the marble figures, including a statue of a young man, which would later be named Ephebi of Antikythera. His face is calm, his posture dynamic, and the stonework is so perfect that it creates a sense of living presence. This find was a reminder that ancient craftsmen were not just artisans, but true artists who possessed technologies that would be lost in the centuries to come. Archaeologists began to realize that they were dealing with a unique cultural layer. The finds were diverse, but united by their high quality. For example, among the ceramics were amphorae produced in different regions of the Mediterranean, from Rhodes to southern Italy. Their shapes and stamps made it possible to accurately date their production and determine trade routes. These vessels were most likely intended for transporting wine, oil, incense, or grain, key commodities of the ancient world. In addition to trade items, bronze mirrors, chest handles, and decorative furniture elements were found. All of this spoke to the high status of the cargo's owners. Among the artifacts were even carved wooden fragments, extremely rare finds in underwater archaeology, given the fragility of organic materials. However, the real revelation was a fragment found under a layer of sand and shells. It looked like oxidized bronze with serrations. Scientists initially thought it was part of some decorative grille or armor. But upon closer inspection, it became clear that it was an element of a complex mechanism. The detail was so out of place in the context of an ancient ship that it literally turned the understanding of antiquity upside down. This fragment would become the first piece of a future puzzle, the very device that would later be called the Antikythera Mechanism. It would be dismantled, studied, reconstructed, and spark debates that continue to this day. But at the beginning of the 20th century, archaeologists had no idea what they were holding in their hands. They continued to search for gold, unaware that the real treasure was right under their noses. It is important to note that a significant portion of the finds were recorded but not recovered. Limited technology, a lack of modern equipment, and a shortage of time meant that many objects remained at the bottom of the sea. It was only decades later, when new missions involving underwater robots and deep-sea drones began, that scientists were able to return to these sites and continue the excavations. The first finds formed the basis for the understanding that the ship at Antikythera was not just a merchant vessel. It was a time capsule. Its cargo was a mixture of art, science, religion, and possibly secret knowledge. It was more than just gold. It was a trace of a lost world. What was initially mistaken for a piece of jewelry or armor turned out to be the most mysterious and revolutionary artifact in the history of underwater archaeology. A fragment of bronze with serrated edges, raised from the depths near Antikythera, marked the beginning of decades of research, reconstruction, and hypotheses. It would later be named the Antikythera Mechanism, the first known computer in human history. The find was in poor condition, covered with rust, destroyed by seawater and time. Only with the development of technology, including X-ray tomography and 3D imaging, was it possible to look inside this bronze mystery. Inside was a system of more than 30 gears, each precisely calculated and machined with incredible accuracy. From the very first models, it became clear that this was not a decorative item. It was a tool, a mechanism, a device capable of calculating and modeling complex astronomical processes. With the help of gears and scales, it showed the position of the sun, moon, planets, and phases of the moon, and even predicted eclipses. It had pointers to the zodiac circle, calendar scales, and indicators of lunar cycles. Some scales engraved on bronze plates indicated the dates of the Olympic Games. This means that the mechanism was used both to measure time and to plan cultural or religious events. In essence, we are looking at a miniature universe, a mechanical model of the cosmos enclosed in a bronze case. Scientists still argue about who could have created such a machine. Some point to Archimedes, the great mathematician and engineer from Syracuse, while others point to the school of philosophers and mechanics in Rhodes, where astronomy, mathematics, and metalworking skills were combined. There is also a version that the creator of the mechanism was the scientist Gemin from Pergamum, known for his works on the celestial sphere. Be that as it may, one thing is clear. The device was centuries, and perhaps even millennia, ahead of its time. After the shipwreck at Antikythera, similar technologies have not been found in archaeological finds. This raises the main mystery. Why did knowledge capable of modeling the movement of celestial bodies with such accuracy disappear? Why are there no mentions of such mechanisms in either Greek or Roman texts? Some suggest that such devices existed but were kept in elite circles among philosophers, priests, and astronomers. Perhaps the mechanism was a secret passed down within a small circle. Or maybe it was a one-off experiment that never caught on. Interestingly, this was not the only example of such a mechanism. Several fragments were found on the seabed, some of which, according to experts, could have belonged to additional panels or auxiliary systems. There are hypotheses that the ship was carrying not one, but several similar devices. Modern engineers admit that creating such a design even today is no easy task. It requires precise calculations, complex rotation transmission, and carefully calibrated teeth. All this suggests that the ancient Greeks had a developed scientific base, workshops capable of producing such products, and, importantly, a need for such technology. The mystique surrounding the Antikythera mechanism stems not only from its complexity, but also from its context. It was found among art objects, weapons, and tableware, as if by accident, as if it had been tucked into the cargo. But at the same time, it was carefully packaged, enclosed in a wooden case, and clearly intended for an important customer. Whether it was a Roman patrician, a collector, a scientist, or even a temple is difficult to say. The Antikythera mechanism remains unique. It destroys the linear view of progress. It proves that the ancient world could have been no less complex and advanced than the eras that followed. And if such a mechanism was possible, what other secrets lie in the depths of the sea and oblivion? When archaeologists began to systematically study the finds from the ship at Antikythera, it quickly became clear that this was not just a transport vessel carrying goods. It was a floating museum, an antique caravan carrying not only commercial, but also cultural and possibly ritual value. The holds contained dozens of items, each of which could have taken pride of place in any museum in the world. Among the most striking finds were bronze and marble statues. They were not only striking in their beauty, but also spoke of the high artistic level of the ancient world. For example, the famous Ephebi of Antikythera, a sculpture of a young man in a natural pose, with accurate anatomy and a lively facial expression, still delights connoisseurs of ancient art. A bronze head of a philosopher found nearby, with carefully crafted features, wrinkles, and a beard, confirms that the originals, not copies, were on board. There were also fragments: arms, legs, torsos, heads, pieces of clothing, and armor. All of this could have been part of a single collection or set of sculptures that were being transported to the West, possibly to decorate a villa, palace, or temple. Some of the statues were hollow, made using the lost wax technique, a technology requiring high skill and precision. Along with the works of art, military items were also found. Bronze helmets, some with crests and others with embossing, may have belonged to elite warriors. Sword fragments, spearheads, and shield fragments suggest that the ship was carrying not only cultural treasures, but also weapons, possibly as trophies or gifts. Among the finds were everyday items: bronze spoons, lamps, mirrors, clothing fasteners, and furniture parts. Some bronze elements had decorative shapes, images of lion heads, griffins, and deities. These were not just utilitarian items. They had aesthetic value and reflected the taste and standard of living of their owners. Ceramics occupied a special place. The amphorae, pithoi, and jugs found came from different regions: Rhodes, Kos, southern Italy, and North Africa. Judging by the stamps, the amphorae were used to transport wine, oil, grain, and incense. Some vessels were painted and decorated with ornaments, scenes from myths, and everyday life. Such a wide range of origins indicates an extensive trade network. Perhaps the ship made a multi-stage voyage, calling at ports and replenishing its cargo. Or it was loaded in one place with access to many regions, such as Rhodes, an important trade and cultural center. The question of who ordered this cargo remains open. There have been suggestions that it was all intended for a wealthy Roman patrician who decided to decorate his country residence. Other versions suggest a temple, perhaps a sanctuary, with a luxurious interior was planned. Still others suggest that it was a collection of trophies after a war, for example, after the capture of a Greek city. Nevertheless, the general nature of the items, their condition, packaging, and quality, indicates that the cargo was not just valuable, but carefully selected. It was a collection worthy of emperors, philosophers, and priests. The ship near Antikythera was not just carrying things, it was carrying an idea, taste, knowledge, and the power of a culture that remained great even in its demise. One of the most unexpected discoveries at the wreck site was human remains. For a long time, archaeologists believed that nothing remained of the crew and possible passengers. However, during one of the expeditions in the 21st century, bones were found under a layer of sand and limestone deposits, parts of skulls, vertebrae, ribs, and pelvis. These were the first human remains found at the Antikythera site. Modern technology allowed scientists to conduct genetic analysis of DNA fragments extracted from the bones. Research showed that at least one of the victims was a young man, about 20 years old. His origins pointed to the Eastern Mediterranean. He may have been Greek or Syrian. Moreover, the bones showed signs of physical exertion characteristic of maritime work. He may have been a crew member. This discovery caused a sensation. For the first time, it was possible to hear the voices of those who died in the disaster. Scientists hoped that further analysis would allow them to reconstruct the facial features, height, health, and possibly even the professions of those who ended up in the holds of the sunken ship. In other words, to give back their identities to people who had remained nameless for more than 2,000 years. But human remains were not the only thing hidden at the bottom of the sea near Antikythera. Among the stones and pieces of wood were mysterious objects that sparked heated debate in the scientific community. For example, several stone slabs with perfectly flat sides and symmetrically drilled holes. Some of them had metal inserts or traces of rust. These could have been the basis for some kind of device, perhaps other mechanisms similar to the Antikythera mechanism. Another find was bronze and lead fragments, which were initially thought to be ballast. However, X-ray analysis revealed that some of these objects had a complex internal structure. A hypothesis was put forward that they may have been part of optical or navigational instruments used to measure angles, the horizon, or star coordinates. Ceramic discs were also found, whose function remains unknown. Some of them had central holes and were decorated with symbols resembling astrological signs or signs of the zodiac. A hypothesis was put forward that these could have been training models or elements of demonstration equipment used to explain the structure of the world. Fragments of leather straps found next to the bronze axles were of particular interest. These straps may have served as drives for mechanisms, similar to belt drives in clocks and modern machine tools. If so, we are looking at part of a complex transmission similar to those recreated in the late Middle Ages. All these finds raised the main question for scientists. What kind of ship was it? Who were its passengers? If there were tools, mechanisms, model fragments, and teaching devices on board, then perhaps it was not a merchant ship at all. Some researchers have put forward a bold hypothesis. The ship was a mobile scientific laboratory. It carried devices for demonstration, training, and possibly for ritual purposes. It could have been an expedition of wise men, philosophers, and engineers heading for Rome or another center of the ancient world. Human remains, mysterious stones, belts, mechanical fragments. All of this is coming together in a mosaic picture that is only just beginning to take shape. With each new excavation season, new links in this chain appear. But there is still a feeling that the ship at Antikythera is not just a vessel. It is a mystery hidden in bronze, bone, and stone. A mystery that has been waiting to be solved for 3 millennia. With each new artifact raised from the bottom of the sea near Antikythera, it became clear that this ship was not a chance find. It seems as if it was specially created to leave a mark on history, so that one day, centuries later, it would be remembered. But who created it? Why? And why does its cargo contradict our understanding of the ancient world so much? Scientists, archaeologists, historians, and even philosophers have been trying to answer these questions for over a century. Theories range from rational to downright mystical, but each of them deserves attention, if only because the attempt to explain the anomaly itself brings us closer to the truth. One of the most common versions is that the ship was carrying trophies. These could have been spoils from a military campaign by the Romans or mercenaries hired by local rulers. In that era, war and art went hand in hand. Statues, bronze, gold, mechanisms, all of these were valued and taken to Rome. Emperors sought to decorate their residences and temples with symbols of power and Greek grandeur. Perhaps the cargo was destined for one of the Roman patricians who had assembled a rare collection. There is another version. It is more academic. The ship could have been part of a large cultural mission. Perhaps it was an order from an influential philosopher, priest, or scientific center seeking to bring together the heritage of the Hellenistic world. In that case, the mechanism, statues, tools, and household items would have had a different function, not as trophies, but as educational, ritual, or scientific objects. The most intriguing theory suggests that the ship was not just a means of transport, but a repository of ancient knowledge. In other words, it was a kind of Noah's Ark for culture. Perhaps, in conditions of political instability, the threat of destruction of cities, sieges, and barbarian raids, a group of philosophers or engineers decided to save what they considered most important. They collected a collection of mechanisms, maps, objects, books, and tried to take it to a place where it could be preserved. For example, to Alexandria, Rome, or the mysterious islands of the West. Mysticism did not bypass this story either. Some researchers, including science popularizers and authors of alternative theories, believe that the Antikythera Mechanism was not just a calendar or a planetarium. They suggest that it could have been an astrological computer, or even a device capable of reading the movement of the stars for magical purposes. According to this version, the ship was carrying the instruments of an ancient esoteric brotherhood that preserved lost knowledge about the universe. This hypothesis is supported by the fact that no ancient source directly mentions a device similar to the Antikythera Mechanism. Perhaps this is the reason why it was not written about, because it was a secret. A sacred object passed down from generation to generation. Or perhaps the device was so unique that it simply did not have time to spread, perishing along with its creators. However, not everyone agrees with the mysticism. Skeptics say that we are only seeing a fragment of a world in which such things were possible. Very little has survived to reach us. Libraries were burned, cities were destroyed, mechanisms decayed. What we found at Antikythera is a miracle of preservation, a random drop from a vast ancient ocean. And yet, the ship continues to raise questions. Why are there so many different objects among the finds? Why is the technology represented in the mechanism ahead of its time? Why were human remains found nearby, possibly those of passengers, possibly the guardians of this cargo? There are no answers, but there is something more important: the very fact that such questions have arisen. The Antikythera ship breaks the mold. It destroys the simple understanding of antiquity as a time of primitive technology and crude beliefs. It shows that where we are accustomed to seeing the past, the future may be hidden. Perhaps there are more ships like this lying at the bottom of other seas. Perhaps knowledge lost after the fall of the ancient world is waiting for its moment. And perhaps one day, one of them will be found. And then we will once again hear the voice of a civilization that is so lacking in our fast-paced 21st century. Antikythera does not provide ready-made answers. It provides direction. And perhaps that is even more important.